You're marrying a cook? A man who flips burgers for a living. My father's voice didn't just fill the room. It shattered it. He took the wedding invitation, the one I had spent weeks picking out, the one with the tiny gold-pressed flowers, and he ripped it right down the middle. Rip. The sound felt like it was happening to my own skin. Dad, please, I whispered. My voice was small like a child's. He's not just a cook. He's a chef. He has dreams. He's the kindest man I've ever. Kindness doesn't pay for a mansion, Sarah, my brother Leo yelled. He was leaning against the marble kitchen island, swirling a glass of wine that probably cost more than my fiancé's car. He started laughing, a mean, sharp sound that echoed off the high ceilings. I bet the wedding food will be cheap street snacks. Are we going to have to stand in line for greasy tacos in our tuxedos? How humiliating. My father threw the torn pieces of my wedding invitation onto the floor. They fluttered down like dead birds. If you marry that loser, you aren't a daughter of this house anymore. You walk out that door, you walk out alone. I looked at the floor. I looked at the man who raised me and the brother I used to play with. My heart wasn't just racing. It felt like a trapped bird beating its wings against my ribs. I could smell the expensive cigar smoke on my father's breath, and the cold, sterile scent of their perfect life. I turned around. I didn't say a word. I grabbed my coat, my fingers numbed by the chill in the air, and I walked out into the rain. But before we continue this story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today and how old are you? I'm really curious to see who is joining me for this journey. Happy listening. The rain was cold. It wasn't a soft romantic rain. It was the kind of rain that needles your skin and makes your bones ache. As I walked down the long, paved driveway of my father's estate, I looked back at the house. It was a giant box of glass and steel, glowing with warm yellow lights. It looked beautiful, but to me it felt like a cage. I thought about Mark. Mark didn't have a glass house. He lived in a tiny apartment above a bakery. When he came home, he smelled like yeast, roasted garlic, and rosemary. His hands were rough, covered in tiny silver scars from knives and red marks from hot pans. But when those hands held mine, I felt safer than I ever did in my father's mansion. I remembered the first time I met him. I was sitting alone at a small diner, crying because my father had just told me I wasn't business-minded enough to run the family company. Mark was the guy behind the counter. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just slid a plate of warm apple pie in front of me. The secret is the sea salt, he had said with a wink. It makes the sweet stuff taste better. He was right. And now I was choosing him over everything I had ever known. The morning of my wedding was silent. Usually in movies, the bride is surrounded by bridesmaids drinking champagne. There's hairspray in the air and the sound of giggling. My room was quiet. I was staying in a small hotel room near the courthouse. The only sound was the hum of the old air conditioner and the ticking of my watch on the nightstand. Tick, tick, tick. I looked at my dress. It wasn't a designer gown. It didn't cost $10,000. I bought it at a vintage shop. It was lace, a little yellowed with age, but it fit me perfectly. I looked at my phone. 0 messages from Dad. 0 messages from Leo. I felt a lump in my throat so big it hurt to swallow. I wanted them to be there. Even after the screaming, even after the insults, a part of me kept thinking the door would fly open and my dad would say, "I'm sorry, Sarah. Let me walk you down the aisle." I waited until the very last second. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking so hard I could barely put on my lipstick. I kept checking the screen. Maybe they were just late? Maybe they were stuck in traffic? But deep down I knew. They weren't coming. They were probably at the golf club right now, telling their friends that I had lost my mind for a man who worked in a kitchen. When I arrived at the small chapel, the air was heavy with the smell of old wood and candle wax. Mark was standing at the front. He looked so handsome in his cheap, rented suit. His hair was slicked back, and his eyes were searching the back of the room. He was looking for my family. I stepped into the doorway. The music started. A simple piano version of a song we both loved. I took a deep breath. The air felt thin. I started to walk. There was nobody on the left side of the aisle. The pews were empty, their dark wood polished and cold. On the right side, there were a few of Mark's friends, other cooks, a waitress from the diner, his elderly aunt. They smiled at me, but I could see the pity in their eyes. I walked alone. Every step felt like I was dragging a weight. Thump, thump, thump. My heels clicked on the stone floor. I didn't have a father to hold my arm. I didn't have a brother to wink at me. I looked at Mark. He saw the tears starting to spill over my eyelids. He stepped down from the altar, reaching out his hand to meet me halfway. "I'm here," he whispered as he took my hand. His palm was warm. "I'm always going to be here." We stood before the official. I said "I do," but my voice cracked. I was happy to be his wife, but my heart was breaking for the family that had thrown me away like trash. While we were exchanging rings, simple silver bands, I couldn't stop thinking about what Leo had said. I bet the wedding food will be cheap street snacks. We didn't even have a reception. We went to a small park with a bag of sandwiches and sat on a bench. "I'm going to make it up to you, Sarah," Mark said, looking out at the pond. "One day, I'm going to give you the world on a silver platter. I'm going to make them regret every word." I smiled, but I didn't really believe him. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted the pain to stop. The next 3 years were hard. We lived in a studio apartment where the heater rattled all night. Mark worked 16-hour shifts. He would come home at 2 a.m., his back aching, his clothes smelling of grease. I worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. I never called my father. He never called me. Sometimes I would see photos of them in the society magazines. There was Leo standing on a yacht. There was my father shaking hands with the governor. They looked happy. They looked like they hadn't missed me for a single second. Then one Tuesday night, Mark came home with a look in his eye I had never seen before. He wasn't tired. He was vibrating. "Sarah," he said, his voice breathless, "there's a new show. A global competition. They're looking for the best undiscovered chef in the country. The prize is $1 million and a restaurant in the city center." I looked at our cracked ceiling. I looked at our empty fridge. "Mark, those shows are for people with big names. We're just us." "Trust me," he said. Months passed. Mark disappeared into the competition. I barely saw him. I watched him on the TV screen from our tiny sofa. My heart in my throat as he chopped, sautéed, and plated food that looked like art. The world started to notice. The lowly cook was winning. The finale was held on a Friday night. I sat in the front row of the studio, my hands clenched in my lap. The lights were blinding. The music was booming. The host stood on the stage holding a gold envelope. And the winner of the world's greatest chef, and the new owner of the Golden Pavilion, is Mark Turner. The room exploded. Confetti rained down like silver snow. Mark was crying. I was crying. He had done it. We went home that night to our tiny apartment for the last time. We were exhausted, buried under a mountain of flowers and contracts. Mark fell asleep immediately. I sat by the window watching the sun start to rise. I picked up my phone to set an alarm. My screen was glowing. It wasn't just one notification. The screen was scrolling so fast I couldn't read the names. 10 missed calls. 25 missed calls. 40 missed calls. I looked at the caller ID. My heart stopped. Dad. Leo. Dad. Leo. The count kept going up. Hey. 70. Suddenly the phone began to vibrate in my hand again. It was a video call from my father. I stared at his face on the screen. He looked older, but his eyes were wide with a frantic, desperate look I had never seen. I didn't answer. I watched it ring until it stopped. Then, a text message popped up from Leo. "Sarah, please pick up. We're in trouble. The family business. It's gone. We're losing the house. We need help. We saw the news about Mark. Please tell him we're sorry. Tell him we always knew he was a genius." I looked at the 88 missed calls. Then I looked at the front door. Someone was pounding on it. Not a soft knock. A loud, heavy, terrifying boom. "Sarah, open the door." It was my father's voice. But he wasn't alone. I heard sirens in the distance, getting closer and closer to our building. The pounding on the door didn't stop. It was a heavy, rhythmic sound that made the thin wood of our apartment door groan. Boom, boom, boom. I stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, my phone still glowing with that terrifying number. 88 missed calls. "Sarah, I know you're in there." My father's voice sounded raw, like he had been screaming for hours. It wasn't the powerful booming voice I remembered from the mansion. It sounded thin, shaky, and desperate. I looked over at Mark. He was still fast asleep on our sagging mattress, his face finally peaceful after months of stress. The blue light from the TV was still flickering in the corner of the room, showing a silent replay of him holding the golden trophy. He looked so happy on the screen. I didn't want to wake him up. I didn't want the real world to ruin this one moment of peace. I tiptoed to the door. My heart was thumping so hard I could feel it in my throat. I looked through the tiny peephole. My father was standing there, but I barely recognized him. His expensive silk suit was wrinkled and stained at the hem. His hair, usually perfectly slicked back, was messy and damp from the rain. Behind him, my brother Leo was pacing the hallway, biting his nails. He was pale, his eyes darting around the hallway like a trapped animal. "Open the door, Sarah," Leo hissed, his voice cracking. "The police are downstairs. They're seizing everything. We have nowhere else to go." I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. My mind went back to my wedding day. I remembered the sound of that same paper ripping. I remembered them laughing about street snacks, while I walked down a lonely aisle. I slowly turned the deadbolt. Click. The door swung open, and the cold air from the hallway rushed in. My father didn't wait for an invite. He pushed his way inside, his eyes landing on our tiny, cramped living space. 3 years ago, he would have made a joke about how our kitchen was smaller than his walk-in closet. Now he looked at it like it was a lifeboat on a sinking ship. "Sarah, thank God," he breathed, trying to grab my shoulders. I stepped back. I didn't want him to touch me. "What are you doing here, Dad?" I asked. My voice was cold. It surprised me how steady I sounded. "Did you see the news?" Leo pushed past my father, waving his phone in my face. "Mark won. He's the best chef in the world. The prize money. The restaurant contract. Sarah, it's worth millions. We're family. You have to help us." I looked at Leo. He looked like a beggar in a $5,000 watch. "Family? You tore up my wedding invitation. You told me I wasn't a daughter of that house anymore. You haven't called me in 3 years. Not even on my birthday. We were teaching you a lesson," my father barked. But then his face softened into a fake, greasy smile. "But you showed us, didn't you? You picked a winner." I always knew Mark had a spark. I told Leo, I said, "That boy has talent." The lie was so big it felt like the air in the room got thicker. I felt a wave of nausea. They weren't here because they missed me. They were here because their empire of glass and steel had finally shattered, and they saw Mark as a giant pile of gold. Just then the bed creaked. Mark sat up, rubbing his eyes. He squinted at the bright hallway light and the 2 men standing in our living room. "Sarah," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "What's going on?" He stood up, still wearing his old property of culinary school t-shirt. He looked at my father and Leo. He didn't look angry. He looked confused. Mark was a simple man. He believed in hard work and good salt. He didn't understand people who used words like weapons. "Mr. Miller?" Mark said, looking at my father. "Leo? Is everything okay?" "Mark, my boy." My father rushed over to him, grabbing Mark's hand and shaking it vigorously. It was the same hand my father had refused to touch 3 years ago. "Congratulations. We saw the finale. Truly spectacular. That roasted sea bass? A work of art." Mark looked at me, his eyebrows raised. He knew my father had never even tasted his cooking. "We're in a bit of a jam, Mark," Leo said, stepping closer. He didn't even look Mark in the eye. He was looking at the trophy on the table. "A few bad investments. The bank is being very difficult. We need a bridge loan. Just a few $100,000 to get back on our feet. Since you're about to be the face of the Golden Pavilion, we thought maybe we could partner up." Mark stayed silent for a long time. He looked at the 2 men, then he looked at the 88 missed calls on my phone that was still sitting on the counter. He saw the text message from Leo about the family business being gone. "You want to partner with a lowly cook?" Mark asked softly. The room went dead quiet. You could hear the rain tapping against the window. My father's face turned a deep shade of red. He let go of Mark's hand. "Now look, let's not bring up the past. We all say things we don't mean when we're stressed. We're here now. That's what matters." I stepped between them. It matters to you because you're broke. Where were you when we couldn't pay our heating bill? Where were you when Mark was working 20 hours a day until his hands bled? Sarah, be reasonable. Leo snapped. We're your blood. You're going to let us sleep on the street while you live in a mansion. We don't live in a mansion, Leo, I said, gesturing to our peeling wallpaper. We live here. And you aren't staying. My father's eyes turned cold. The fake smile disappeared. You're really going to turn your back on your father? After everything I gave you. You gave me a lot of things, Dad, I said. But you took away my family on the day I needed them most. You made me walk down that aisle alone. The sirens I had heard earlier were right outside now. Blue and red lights started flashing against our walls, dancing over the trophies and the dirty dishes. A loudspeaker echoed from the street. Investors of Miller Holdings, please remain calm. My father panicked. He looked at the window, then at the door. He looked like a man who was about to lose his last bit of dignity. He grabbed Mark's arm, his fingers digging in. Please, just sign a guarantee for us. The bank will stop if they know your name is on the paperwork. You're a star now. They'll listen to you. Mark looked down at my father's hand on his arm. Then he looked at me. I could see the kindness in his eyes, the same kindness that made me fall in love with him. He wanted to help. That was his nature. He hated seeing people suffer, even people who had been cruel to him. Mark, no, I whispered. Mark looked back at my father. He took a deep breath. I have to go to the studio in 4 hours, he said quietly. I have to sign the final contracts for the restaurant. I'm tired, Mr. Miller. So you'll do it? My father asked, hope lighting up his face. You'll help us at the signing? Mark didn't answer. He walked over to the door and held it open. You should go. The police are waiting for you downstairs. I think it's better if you deal with them first. Leo cursed under his breath and pushed past me into the hall. My father stood there for a second, his lip trembling. He looked at me one last time, but he didn't see a daughter. He saw a closed bank vault. He turned and walked out, his shoulders slumped. I shut the door and locked it. I leaned my back against it and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. My whole body was shaking. Mark came over and sat next to me. He put his arm around me, and I buried my face in his chest. He still smelled like the studio kitchen, butter and expensive spices. Are they really gone? I asked. For now, Mark said. But Sarah, Leo was right about one thing. The news is everywhere. It's not just your father who's going to be looking for us. He was right. As the sun began to peek over the city buildings, my phone started buzzing again. It wasn't my father this time. It was a private number. Then another. Then a reporter from a major news network. But then, a text message came through that made my heart stop. It wasn't from a family member or a reporter. It was from an unknown contact, and it contained a photo. It was a photo of me and Mark at the courthouse on our wedding day. We were kissing in the rain. But in the background of the photo, standing behind a tree, was a man in a dark hoodie. The text under the photo read, "The world thinks he's a hero, but I know what he did to get that trophy. Tell him to call me, or the whole world finds out the truth." I looked at Mark. He was staring at the phone, his face turning ghostly white. The man who had been so calm and kind just seconds ago was now trembling. "Mark," I whispered. "What is this? Who is that?" Mark didn't look at me. He stood up and walked to the window, staring down at the street where the police were still gathered. "I did what I had to do for us, Sarah," he said. His voice was different. It was cold. It was a voice I had never heard before. The silence in the room was heavier than the pounding on the door had been. Mark was standing by the window, his silhouette dark against the gray morning light. He looked like a stranger. The man I knew was soft edges and warm smiles, but the man standing there now looked sharp, stiff, and scared. "Mark," I said again. I stood up from the floor, my legs feeling like jelly. I held the phone out toward him. The screen was still bright, showing that creepy photo of us from 3 years ago. "Who is this? What is he talking about? What did you do?" Mark didn't turn around. He kept watching the police cars down on the street. "The competition wasn't just about cooking, Sarah," he said quietly. "It's a $1 billion show. People don't just win that by being good at chopping onions. But you are good. Cried out. My voice sounded loud in the small room. You're the best. I watched you. I saw you work until your fingers were raw. You didn't need to do anything wrong. Finally, he turned to face me. There were dark circles under his eyes that I hadn't noticed during the celebration. There was a judge, he whispered. A man named Julian Vane. He's the most powerful food critic in Europe. He told me on the first day that I didn't have the right look for a champion. He said a guy from a diner would make the show look cheap. Mark took a step toward me, his hands shaking. He was going to kick me off in the first round, Sarah. No matter how my food tasted. And I thought about you. I thought about our rent. I thought about your father laughing at us. I couldn't let him send me home. So what did you do? I asked. My heart felt like it was slowing down, getting cold. I found out something about him, Mark said, looking at the floor. Something he didn't want the world to know. I didn't want to use it, I swear. But it was the only way he would actually taste my food without bias. I just gave him a choice. Before I could ask what that choice was, my phone buzzed again. Another text. 5 minutes, Sarah. Tell Mark to meet me at the back alley of the studio. If he doesn't show up, the video of him in Vane goes to every news outlet in the country. Let's see how the best chef likes prison food. I felt like the walls were closing in. Just an hour ago, we were the most successful couple in the country. Now we were hiding in a dark apartment while my family went broke outside and a blackmailer waited in the shadows. We have to go, Mark said. He grabbed his jacket. He wasn't asking. We left the apartment through the fire escape. We didn't want to run into my father or the police in the lobby. The metal stairs were slippery and cold. The air smelled like wet pavement and old trash. As we reached the bottom, I saw a black car idling at the end of the block. Stay behind me, Mark whispered. We walked toward the studio where the big signing was supposed to happen later that day. The building was huge, covered in posters of Mark's face. He looked so proud in those pictures. Now he kept his head down, hiding under a hood. When we reached the back alley, the shadows were deep. A man was leaning against a stack of wooden crates. He was wearing a dark hoodie just like in the photo. He was small, skinny, and he was whistling a happy tune that made my skin crawl. You're late, chef, the man said. He pushed back his hood. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that face. He wasn't a stranger. Toby. I gasped. Toby had been Mark's best friend for years. They went to culinary school together. When we were broke, Toby was the one who lent us $50 for groceries. He was the one who sat on our sofa and told Mark he was a genius. He was at our wedding. He was one of the only people on the right side of the aisle. Hey, Sarah, Toby said with a crooked grin. He didn't look like the nice guy I remembered. He looked hungry. Long time no see. You look great. Marriage must agree with you. Toby, why are you doing this? Mark's voice was breaking. I was going to hire you. I told you as soon as I got the restaurant you were going to be my head sous chef. We were going to do this together. Toby spat on the ground. Sous chef? You want me to chop carrots while you get the gold trophies and the $1 million checks? We started at the same place, Mark. I'm just as good as you. But the cameras loved your poor boy story. You got lucky. It wasn't luck, I snapped, stepping forward. He worked. You stayed home and complained. Toby laughed, a dry, mean sound. Maybe. But I was the one who saw Mark talking to Julian Vane in the hallway. I was the one who recorded them. I have the whole conversation on my phone. The threats, the deal, all of it. Mark, you didn't win that show. You bought it. I didn't buy it. Mark yelled, his face turning red. Vane tried to cheat me first. I just leveled the playing ground. The public won't care about that, Toby said, checking his watch. They love a hero, but they love a fallen hero even more. Think about the headlines, Sarah. Chef wins through blackmail. Your dad would love that, wouldn't he? He'd finally be right about Mark. Mark looked like he wanted to jump at Toby, but he stayed still. He knew Toby held all the power. What do you want? Mark asked, his shoulders sagging. Half, Toby said. Half of the prize money. And a 30% stake in the new restaurant. I want my name on the sign too. Turner and Miller? No. Turner and Reed. That sounds much better. I can't give you that, Mark said. The contracts are already written. The investors. Then change them, Toby said. You have until the press conference at noon. If I don't see a new contract with my name on it, the video goes live. And Sarah, don't try to call the cops. I have the file set to upload automatically if I don't check in. Toby turned and started to walk away. He stopped for a second and looked back at me. By the way, Sarah, tell your brother Leo to stop calling me. He's the one who told me where you guys were staying this morning. He wanted a cut too, but I don't share with losers. Toby disappeared around the corner, leaving us alone in the cold alley. I felt like I had been punched. My own brother had sold us out. Leo didn't just want help. He wanted to tear us down if he couldn't have what we had. Mark turned to me. His eyes were wet. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I wanted to give you a perfect life. I wanted to show your family that I was worth something. I thought if I won, everything would be okay. I looked at him. I loved him, but for the first time I felt a tiny seed of doubt. Was our whole new life built on a lie? We have to decide, Mark, I said. My heart was heavy. The press conference is in 3 hours. Do we give Toby what he wants? Or do we tell the truth before he can? Mark looked up at the giant poster of his own face on the side of the studio. He looked at his hands, the hands that had cooked 1,000 meals just to get here. If I tell the truth, I lose the restaurant, he said. I lose everything. We'll be back in that apartment with no money and 1 million people hating us. Your father will win. He'll get to say, I told you so for the rest of his life. Suddenly my phone rang again. I thought it was another threat. But when I looked at the screen, it was a number I didn't know. I answered it anyway. Hello. Sarah. A woman's voice whispered. She sounded terrified. Is this Sarah Turner? Yes. Who is this? You don't know me. My name is Elena. I'm Julian Vane's assistant. You need to get Mark out of the city. Now. What? Why? It's not just Toby, she said, her voice shaking. Vane isn't going to let Mark blackmail him forever. He's not waiting for the press conference. He's sent people to find Mark. They aren't reporters, Sarah. They're the kind of people who make problems disappear. I heard a loud screech of tires at the end of the alley. A big black SUV pulled in, blocking the exit. The doors opened and 3 men in suits stepped out. They weren't smiling. I looked at Mark. He saw them too. Run, he whispered. He grabbed my hand, and we started to sprint toward the back door of the studio. But as we reached the handle, I realized it was locked. We were trapped. The men started walking toward us, their footsteps heavy on the pavement. One of them reached into his jacket. Mark Turner, the man asked. His voice was like gravel. Mr. Vane wants to have a private word about your arrangement. Just then, the heavy metal door of the studio creaked open from the inside. A hand reached out and pulled us into the darkness. In here. Quick. The door slammed shut and the bolt slid into place just as a heavy thud hit the wood from the other side. I blinked, trying to see in the dark hallway. Standing there, holding a flashlight, was someone I never expected to see. It was the waitress from the diner, the one who had been at our wedding. Her name was Beth. She looked older, and she was wearing a janitor's uniform. Beth. Mark gasped. Keep your voices down, she whispered. I've been working here for a year. I've seen what Vane does to people who get in his way. Follow me. There's a way out through the basement, but you're going to have to trust me. I looked at Mark. I looked at the door being kicked from the outside. We had no choice. The basement of the studio was a maze of hot pipes and dusty boxes. It smelled like laundry detergent and old grease. Beth led us through the shadows, her flashlight cutting through the dark like a blade. Behind us, we could hear the muffled thuds of the men in suits trying to break down the heavy metal door. Why are you helping us, Beth? I whispered. My legs were shaking so hard I could barely keep up. You could get into so much trouble. Beth stopped for a second and looked back at us. Her face was tired, but her eyes were kind. I remember your wedding day, Sarah. I remember how you looked walking down that aisle with no one but yourself. I saw the way Mark looked at you. In this city, people sell their souls for a fancy plate of food. You guys were the only real thing I'd seen in years. She pushed open a small, heavy door that led to a narrow service tunnel. This comes out 3 blocks away, near the old subway station. Go. Don't go back to your apartment. They'll be waiting there. Beth, thank you, Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. Don't thank me yet, she said, her face turning serious. Mark Vane is a monster. He doesn't just want the video. He wants to make sure you never cook again. You have to decide what's more important, the restaurant or your life. We scrambled into the tunnel. It was cramped and damp. I could hear the sound of rats scurrying in the corners. Mark held my hand so tight it hurt, but I didn't pull away. I was terrified. Everything was falling apart. Our dream, our money, our safety, it was all dissolving like salt in water. When we finally climbed out of a manhole in a side street, the city was fully awake. The sun was bright and hot. Everywhere I looked, I saw Mark's face. It was on the side of buses. It was on giant digital screens. The best chef in the world. Press conference at noon. I checked my phone. It was 10:30 a.m. 95 missed calls. I looked at the latest messages. My father and Leo were getting more desperate. Sarah, the police are at the front door. They're taking the paintings. They're taking the cars. Tell Mark to send the money now. We are your family. Then, a new message from Toby. 1 hour left, Mark. I'm standing outside the studio. I see the black SUVs. I know Vane's guys are looking for you. If you don't show up with that contract, I'm sending the video to the guys in the suits myself. I'll let them do the dirty work. Mark leaned against a brick wall, breathing hard. He looked at his watch, then at me. I can't keep running, Sarah. If I don't show up to that press conference, Vane wins. If I do show up and don't pay Toby, I go to jail. And if I do pay Toby, I'm a slave to him for the rest of my life. There has to be another way, I said. I felt a spark of anger deep in my chest. I thought about my father's face. I thought about Leo selling us out. I thought about Toby's smug grin. They all think we're weak. They think they can just rip us apart because we started with nothing. What are you saying? Mark asked. I'm saying we stop playing their game, I said. I pulled out my phone and started typing. Mark, you're a great chef. No one can take that away from you. The food you cooked on that show was real. Even Vane couldn't deny it. That's why he was scared of you. I looked at him, my eyes burning. We're going to that press conference. But we're not going there to sign their contracts. The lobby of the Golden Pavilion was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. It was all gold leaf, white marble, and sparkling crystal chandeliers. It was supposed to be our future. Reporters from all over the world were crowded inside, holding cameras and microphones. Mark and I stood in the back in trance, hidden by a heavy velvet curtain. Are you ready? I asked. Mark took a deep breath. He had changed into a clean chef's coat that Beth had found for him in the studio locker room. He looked sharp. He looked like a king. I'm ready. As we stepped out from behind the curtain, the room went silent for a split second before a million flashbulbs started popping. The light was blinding. Chef Turner. Over here. Mark, is it true you're partnering with Miller Holdings? How does it feel to be the best in the world? In the front row I saw them. My father and Leo were there, dressed in their last good suits, trying to look important. They were smiling at the cameras, acting like they were the ones who had made Mark a star. Next to them sat Julian Vane. He looked calm and cold. He was sipping a glass of expensive water, his eyes tracking Mark like a hawk. He didn't look worried. He thought he had us trapped. And standing by the side door, leaning against the wall with his phone in his hand, was Toby. He gave Mark a tiny nod and tapped his watch. Tick-tock. Mark walked up to the podium. He didn't sit down. He stood tall, looking out at the crowd. He waited for the noise to die down. Thank you all for coming, Mark said. His voice was steady. It filled the room without needing the microphone. 3 years ago, I married the love of my life. Her family didn't come to the wedding because they said I was just a lowly cook. They said our food would be cheap street snacks. He looked directly at my father. My father's smile froze. They were right about one thing, Mark continued. I am a cook. I've spent my life in kitchens. I've burned my hands, I've worked until I couldn't stand, and I've cooked for people who didn't even know my name. But I never lied about the food. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Julian Vane leaned forward, his face hardening. This morning, Mark said, I was told that if I didn't share my success with people who didn't earn it, my career would be over. I was told that if I didn't pay for silence, the world would see a video that shows I'm a fraud. Toby's hand froze over his phone. Leo's face turned pale. I'm not going to pay, Mark said. And I'm not going to sign any contracts with Miller Holdings. My father-in-law and my brother-in-law are not my partners. They are strangers who only showed up when the lights turned on. The reporters started whispering frantically. My father stood up, his face purple with rage. Mark! Shut up. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, Mark said. He looked at Toby. Toby, if you want to show the world that video, do it. But before you do, everyone should know the truth about Julian Vane. Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. He pressed play. A voice came through the speakers. It was Julian Vane. I don't care how the steak tastes, Mark. If you want to stay in this competition, you'll make sure my brother's construction company gets the contract for the new restaurant. Otherwise, I'll make sure you're back flipping burgers by Tuesday. The room exploded into chaos. Julian Vane jumped to his feet, screaming at his security guards. Switch it off. Grab him. Toby panicked. He saw his leverage disappearing. He looked at his phone, his thumb hovering over the send button. You asked for it, Mark, he yelled over the noise. But before Toby could press anything, the grand front doors of the restaurant burst open. It wasn't more reporters. It was a group of men in dark jackets with FBI written in yellow letters on the back. Behind them was Elena, Vane's assistant, pointing directly at the stage. That's him, she shouted. That's Julian Vane. And those are the men who tried to kidnap the Turners. In the middle of the screaming, the flashing lights, and the guards rushing the stage, my phone buzzed one last time. It was a text from a blocked number. You think the FBI is here for Vane? Look at the screen, Sarah. Look at what Mark is really hiding. I looked up at the giant digital screen behind Mark. The video Toby had wasn't playing. Something else was. It was a video of a dark kitchen years ago. A fire was breaking out. A man was trapped behind a locked door screaming for help. And a younger Mark Turner was standing there holding a key, watching the flames grow, and then walking away. The whole room stopped. Everyone turned to look at the screen. The silence was more terrifying than the screaming. Mark looked at the screen, and the blood drained from his face. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a horror I had never seen before. Sarah, he whispered. I can explain. But before he could say another word, the lights in the entire building went black. A loud crash of glass. A woman's scream. Silence. The darkness in the restaurant was thick and suffocating. I couldn't see my own hands, but I could hear the chaos. People were screaming, chairs were being knocked over, and the sound of breaking glass echoed like gunshots. Mark! I screamed. My voice felt thin in the massive room. Mark, where are you? A hand grabbed my arm. I gasped, ready to fight, but the grip was familiar. It was Mark. He pulled me close, his chest heaving. We moved toward the service hallway, the only place he knew by heart. Even in the pitch black, Mark could navigate a kitchen. We burst through the double doors into the industrial kitchen, and the emergency red lights flickered on. The red glow made everything look like it was bleeding. Mark slumped against a stainless steel table, his white chef's coat stained with soot and sweat. That video! I whispered, my heart breaking. The fire! Mark, who was behind that door? Mark looked at me, and for the first time in our marriage he didn't look like my hero. He looked like a broken boy. It was my father, Sarah. I froze. I thought Mark's parents had died in a car accident. He was an alcoholic, Mark said, his voice trembling. He used to come into the restaurant where I worked as a kid and cause scenes. That night, he passed out in the back office with a cigarette. The fire started fast. I had the key. I stood there, Sarah. I stood there for 10 seconds, thinking about every time he'd hit me, every time he'd spent our rent money on a bottle. I didn't walk away to let him die. I froze because I was terrified. By the time I turned the key, the smoke was too much. I couldn't get to him. He sank to the floor, burying his face in his hands. I've spent every day since then trying to be a good man. I thought if I became the best chef, if I made enough money to take care of you, I could erase those 10 seconds of hesitation. But you can't cook away the past. The door to the kitchen swung open. I expected the FBI or the men in suits. Instead, it was my father and Leo. They didn't look like powerful businessmen anymore. My father's tie was ripped, and Leo was covered in dust. They looked at Mark on the floor, and then they looked at the expensive kitchen equipment around them. The FBI is taking Vane, my father said. He sounded old. Toby ran off when the lights went out. The police are looking for him for blackmail. Leo stepped forward, looking at his shoes. We saw the video, Mark. The whole world saw it. The news is already calling it the tragedy of the Golden Chef. Your reputation is done. The restaurant. It's over before it even opened. My father looked at me. There were no more roars. No more insults about lowly cooks. Just a hollow, tired man. Sarah, the bank took the house 10 minutes ago. We have nothing. I thought if we came here we could save ourselves. I stood up and walked over to my father. I looked him right in the eyes that had watched me cry on my wedding day without a hint of pity. You didn't come here to save us, I said quietly. You came here to eat the scraps of a man you called a loser. You spent your whole life building a world made of glass, and you're shocked that it broke. I turned back to Mark. He was still on the floor waiting for me to leave him. He expected me to walk away just like my family had walked away from me. I sat down on the floor next to him. I took his scarred, rough hands in mine. The restaurant is gone, I said to him. The money is probably gone too. The world knows your darkest secret. But I'm not my father, Mark. I don't leave when things get ugly. I'm a fraud, Sarah, he choked out. No, I said. You're a man who survived. You made a mistake when you were a scared kid. Vane and Toby tried to use your shame to cage you. But the cage is open now. There's nothing left to hide. I looked at my father and Leo, who were standing there awkwardly, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. Go, I told them. Find a job. Start over. Don't call me again until you can look at a cook and see a human being. They left. They walked out into the night, two shadows in a city that didn't care about their name anymore. 1 year later. The air was warm and smelled of sea salt and roasting garlic. It wasn't a multi-million-dollar restaurant with marble floors. It was a small wooden shack on the edge of a public beach. There were no white tablecloths, just picnic tables and string lights that hummed in the breeze. Mark was behind the grill, wearing a plain black t-shirt. He wasn't the best chef in the world anymore. He was just Mark. He was flipping burgers and serving grilled corn on paper plates. A line of people stretched down the sand. They weren't there because of a TV show. They were there because the food was honest. I sat at the counter, handling the cash register. My phone sat next to me. It didn't ring 88 times a day anymore. Most days it didn't ring at all, and I loved the silence. Mark walked over and handed a small plate to a little girl who was waiting with her mom. It was a simple slice of apple pie. What's the secret? The girl asked, her eyes wide. Mark winked at her the same way he had winked at me years ago in that lonely diner. The secret is the sea salt. It makes the sweet stuff taste better. Just like life. He looked at me and smiled. We didn't have the mansion. We didn't have the gold trophy. It had been returned after the scandal. But for the first time since I walked down that aisle alone, I didn't feel lonely. We had lost everything the world said mattered. And in the middle of that loss, we finally found the one thing my father could never buy. We found peace. As the sun began to set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Mark reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. Happy? He asked. I looked at our little shack, the happy customers, and the man who had fought through hell to be by my side. I thought about those 88 missed calls from a world that only loved us when we were on top. I took a deep breath of the salty air and leaned my head on his shoulder. More than happy, I whispered. I'm home. I hope you enjoyed this story. I'd love to know which city you're joining me from, so please let me know in the comments section. Thank you for giving me energy with your warm support. By the way, I've posted 2 other life stories on the screen that I suggest you don't miss. If you haven't joined our family yet, don't forget to subscribe. Until the next story, take care of yourselves. With much love and respect.